As the conflict in Europe escalates, Joe Biden calls in reservists to deploy to Europe. Fears of World War III are mounting. Moscow has been slammed once again with drone attacks. And now we're hearing more calls for the military draft. No joke. The Council on Foreign Relations is saying the all-volunteer force will not be enough. Military.com has an op-ed saying it's time for the military draft. And when I see all of this, I think to myself, thank heavens I am 37 years old. Because, of course, the first thing they're going to do is draft all the 18-year-olds. But don't worry. Gen Z, they're Democrats, right? They're for the war. How about that? Well, upon thinking about that, I kind of realized that I just posted this skate video and I am particularly physically fit, not like a strongman or anything like that. And then I realized that we have a whole bunch of femboys, soy boys, morbidly obese individuals, so I'm not quite sure being 37 is going to protect me. In Russia, they're expanding conscription up to 30-year-olds. And so when you consider that many of you watching this probably exercise, probably are in shape, they're going to go look at the draft and they're going to be like, listen, boss, we got a whole bunch of 18-year-olds that got noodle arms and they can't even do a pull-up. And then they're going to come and look at us, and we're in our early to mid-30s or whatever. I'm in my, I guess now late 30s. 37 officially qualifies. But for many of you who are in your late 20s to early 30s, they're going to be like, we're going to choose you guys, despite being a little bit older, because you actually take care of yourselves. We don't want these weak, effeminate men who can't hold weapons. But now, no, in all seriousness, I don't know exactly how it would play out. They obviously not every 18-year-old is a weak sissy or anything like that. But I'm just saying, if it does come to a draft, yeah, they're definitely going to be coming for everybody up to probably like 44 years old. And I got to be honest, depending on the scale of the conflict, the draft could extend to literally any able-bodied person. You might actually see 50-year-olds. And they say 50 is the new 30 these days, right? Medical technology and better health has older folks in their even 60s, feeling a lot younger. I'm not saying 60-year-olds will fight. But I mean, 50-year-olds are capable too, especially if they're in shape. Have you seen RFK Jr.? And that guy's lifting. Well, here's the breaking news. Moscow got hit again. The New York Times reporting Russia-Ukraine war drone again hits a Moscow building housing Russian ministries. This is war expanding into Russia as it has been, but now more so. This doesn't end here. These drone attacks are not simply Ukraine using their military prowess. Russia is fully aware that this is NATO versus Russia. And in fact, it may expand to NATO versus BRICS. In which case, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to World War III, should it come to that point. Then we will absolutely get a military draft. No question. None. Let me show you the historical context, too, as we get through this story. But absolutely, if it comes to World War III, yeah, they're going to pull in everybody. And it's going to be interesting. Now, before it even gets to that point, the military draft has to be in effect. So now we're starting to see more and more calls for a draft. And with Joe Biden calling in the ready reserves and selected reserves, it seems increasingly likely. And a lot of people keep saying it's unthinkable. We won't have a draft. Yo, we had a draft 50 years ago. Okay. They use the all-volunteer military force because there hasn't been a substantial conflict like World War II or one or two. And so why would they need to? Especially with the fall of the Soviet Union in our lifetime, there would be no purpose. The draft only happens when they need it to happen. And the selective service, it exists. Y'all men, you're registered. They know you. If it comes down to World War III, there's no question. You're on the front lines, baby. Okay, to be fair, I mean, maybe you'll be a chef or something. You might work engineering. Not everybody is in combat. But let's read. The New York Times says, Ukrainian officials have become more open in their view that targets inside Russia are legitimate. Central Moscow is hit for the second time in 2 days. Russia said a drone hit the same building in central Moscow for the second time in 48 hours, blaming Ukraine, which has made it increasingly clear it would target symbolic and military-related sites deep inside Russia. 2 other drones were shot down on the outskirts of Moscow. Ukraine does not generally confirm or deny responsibility for attacks within Russia's borders, but footage of the overnight attacks early Tuesday strongly suggested The drone used in the attack was one of the Ukrainian-made long-range models identified by the New York Times. We actually have some photos. So surveillance camera captures the moment drone hits Moscow high-rise. Crazy stuff. Man, I've talked about this before, and I was mentioning this. I talked about this a decade ago. When me and my buddies started experimenting with consumer-grade drone tech, the AR Parrot, these things did not have a strong capacity for carrying weight. We were trying to figure out, we had done some splicing and hacking so that you could control the AR Parrot via 3G. This was back when 3G was a bit more prominent. We didn't want to use LTE or anything. We wanted something a bit more ubiquitous, and 3G was a bit more ubiquitous, the cell technology. And so we were trying to figure out how to get a 3G antenna so that the drone wouldn't use Wi-Fi, which is a very limited range, and would instead use cell towers. Then the drone could be launched up, given coordinates, and so long as it was within cell tower range, it would keep receiving data and know where to go. We're well beyond that. These things have GPS. They can be programmed and they can fly until their batteries run out. And now with the advancement, especially considering we've had drones like, I think it was Casey Neistat, who actually was towed by a snowboarding or something with a drone or rode on it or whatever. We have multi-rotor vehicle capabilities for carrying people. You even have those hover bikes. So now the payloads are massive. These drones can carry bombs, and they can fly at high rates of speed and zip and maneuver left, right, up, down, dodge, intercept, and anything attempting to intercept it, fly straight into that city, hit their target via GPS. This is advanced stuff, and it's getting crazy. So you can take a look at this video showing, you don't really see much. You just see smoke coming out of a building. It's fast. There's some bangs. It is what it is. Now, the big question is, with the escalation of warfare into civilian areas, at what point could or would this escalate beyond the Ukraine conflict? Can it simply just remain when Western forces are supplying Ukraine and Ukraine is attacking Moscow? Do you think Vladimir Putin's going to sit there and just say, we are being bombarded by military tech targeting civilian areas, and we don't hold the U.S. responsible in any capacity? No way. At a certain point, Russia has to say something to the effect of, if the U.S. keeps supplying Ukraine to attack us, we will retaliate. Plain and simple. You know, we talk about World War II, Japan, why they attacked the U.S. There's a lot of reasons, but I'll put it this way. Often in these international conflicts, what gets the U.S. drawn into war is supplying weapons to certain groups. And the U.S. had been supporting the British. Obviously, the Axis powers did not like this. And then there's a lot more to the story, don't get me wrong. The point is this. We're directly involved in this conflict. NATO and the United States are the ones fueling all of this. If it were not for the United States, there'd be no war. Russia would walk in, take the Donbass and Crimea. It's over. In fact, maybe they take all of Ukraine. The U.S. is providing the means, the intelligence, even volunteer forces, they say. But you'd have to think that Vladimir Putin was a moron if he did not, to assume he doesn't consider these volunteers serving the U.S. interests, because of course they are. Whether they're commissioned or deployed by the U.S. is irrelevant. This war extends beyond Ukraine's borders, with drone strikes targeting Moscow directly. At what point does Russia say, let's put a little hurt on the United States? Cyber warfare, I think, would be the first thing. Easily done. Terrifyingly easy. What happens if an attack happens? And here's what I imagine the first thing would be. A cyber attack on a U.S., on some kind of U.S. target, maybe a nuclear plant, maybe that's a little bit too extreme, maybe an oil refinery or a water reclamation plant, shuts down water for a large metro area. Let's say 1 million people. A suburban, semi-rural area has their water plant shut down by a cyber attack. Russia claims responsibility. Russia then says, so long as the U.S. is providing resources, we will respond in kind. Now, permanent damage? No, but it shuts water off for a few days. Maybe. Of course, something like that could generate a ton of sentiment against Russia and result in many people voting for more conflict. Or it could result in these people in this area demanding the U.S. cease this conflict, because why are they the collateral damage? I don't know for sure. I just believe that there is a possibility that Russia says, you want to play ball, we play ball. And maybe it won't take the effect of Russia, making the attack. Maybe there will be some kind of sympathetic Syrian electronic army or something to that effect that engages in this and says the U.S. is doing this. Russia denies involvement and says we do not want war with the U.S. But in the U.S., we get hit to try and generate anti-war sentiment among those who are negatively impacted. I hope you all are ready. The Council on Foreign Relations published this July 18th, the uncertain future of the U.S. military's all-volunteer force. A rather light take on the all-military force. Just some history about the global war on terror hurting the brand and the transition in 1973 to an all-volunteer force, et cetera, et cetera. The global war on terror. Basically, they're saying it didn't really work. It didn't really work. On December 31st, 2002, a year after the start of Operation Enduring Freedom, the op-ed page of the New York Times read, "Bring back the draft." A Democrat who voted against the war warned that an all-volunteer force would lead to adventurism and thought a renewed draft would help citizens appreciate the cost of war. By 2004, despite sending 130,000 soldiers into Iraq during the invasion, any debate about enacting the draft was over. A new Gates Commission. They say Congress has grappled with the future of the draft for years. In 2020, a national commission studied the selective service system and recommended keeping the draft and highlighted the need for institutionalized exercises of national mobilization processes and more public engagement to ensure awareness of the system. They say the United States needs innovative ideas and new forums to encourage young men and women to fill their obligations to public service. But it also needs a redesigned military to ensure timely access to the manpower needed to defend the nation and to increase the equity and fairness for the cost of war across our society. It's time for a new Gates Commission, a comprehensive review of the structure of our military and the development of specific guidelines on when and how conscription will be used in future conflict. Now, as I mentioned, the Council on Foreign Relations opinion piece here is a little light, but let me give you the quote, we need a limited military draft from military.com. Before I read this, I want to show you this article from Newsweek. Joe Biden accused of wanting World War III after calling up reserve troops. I hope y'all are ready. Because here's the best part about this. Shout out to our good friend, Harry Sisson. This dude's like, 20 years old? I look forward to seeing you on the front lines, good sir, because, when the military draft happens, you're in the front. It'll be you first. Now, don't get me wrong. This guy is a prominent Democrat supporter. They'll probably protect him and do something like they did in the old days, which is a paid replacement or something like that. But I could imagine a Edge of Tomorrow type scenario. Have you guys seen that movie? Excellent movie, by the way. Some people call it Live, Die, Repeat, but it's Tom Cruise. He's a communications guy. An alien invasion happens on Earth. He goes on TV and he sells the war. He says, we need people. I got to be honest, noble profession. Aliens invaded Earth. We need someone to rally people to help defend it from an alien invasion, to defend us from an alien invasion. I mean, that's what it is. What happens is this guy at the Unified Command says, you, to Tom Cruise, are going on the front line and you will have a camera and you will film these new exosuits in action and you will sell this war. And he's like, I'm not a fighter. I can't do that. And they're like, too effing bad. Great movie, by the way. It's a lot of fun. It's like sci-fi action Groundhog Day. And I could imagine that happening to someone like Harry Sisson. These guys want to go on Twitter and scream about all the good things Democrats are doing. Yeah, okay. I wonder what's going to happen, good sir, when your peers are drafted into the military for Joe Biden's war, for the deep state's war in Ukraine. Because it ain't Trump who wants war in Ukraine. What do you think they're going to say to you when they're like, you sold this? I wonder what they're going to say when they're on the front lines in Kharkov or something. And they're wondering why it is that at 19 years old, they're about to die in Ukraine. Because most people, you don't know. Unless you can really sell it. Here's military.com. It's time to change how our country fills the ranks of our military. Since 1775, our nation has used a combination of volunteers and draftees to meet our national defense personal needs, especially in times of crisis. Today, the military needs only about 160,000 youth from an eligible population of 30 million to meet its current recruitment needs. But after 2 decades of war, both of which ended unsuccessfully and low unemployment, Many experts believe the all-volunteer force has reached a breaking point. The fastest and most effective way to resolve this recruiting crisis is to change how we recruit. Instead of an either all-volunteer force or fully conscripted force model, I propose a both-and solution. We should have our military recruiters sign up new troops for 11 months out of the year, and then have the selective service draft the delta between the military's needs and the total number recruited. This model would alleviate the incredible pressure on our recruiters, lower the cost of finding new troops, and significantly reduce the much decried civilian military gap by subjecting all of America's youth, rich and poor, to the possibility of military service via the draft. Let's be real. It ain't going to be rich kids who are going, because their parents will protect them as they always have. Think Donald Trump had bone spurs or something like that. Come on. Hey, these kids ain't going. Rich, powerful people will revolt. This increased public interest might also have the effect of increasing public pressure to prevent open-ended wars, blah, blah, blah. They say in 1973, the draft was abolished with the establishment of the all-volunteer force, driven largely by the American public's wariness with our debacle in Vietnam. Systemic inequalities in the draft and the fact that the size of our population had become so large in relation to the needs of the military, universal drafting became obsolete. While the all-volunteer force had the effect of lowering discipline problems and professionalizing the force, it also created a vast gap between American citizens and those who serve. The establishment of the all-volunteer force also drove the military to expend an incredible amount of resources in terms of manpower and dollars to build a recruiting machine to attract America's youth to service. Considering it costs about $15,000 to recruit each new member, the overall cost each year exceeds $2 billion. You want to know why this will be catastrophic? I'll show you. It's right here. This is it. Emma, The Calling, GoArmy.com. Emma Malone Lord. Her wonderful recruiting commercial about her two moms at Pride. I will not fight. I will not, nor will many others, lay their lives down for what we see at these Pride events. I got no beef with a lady with two moms, by all means. I think it's a great story. You grew up, you lived a good life, you fought. She says that she was a typical sorority girl stereotype, but she wanted to give back and find her own adventure, and I respect that tremendously. But here's the point I'm making. This commercial shows people celebrating at Pride. The problem? Today's standards, when we look at Pride, sexual gratuitous activity, grooming events, the targeting of children, sexually explicit graphic materials being given to children. Yeah, sorry, wrong message. If you tried to force me to fight for that, ain't gonna work. I'm sorry. You'd have to lock me up. And I'm sure many young people today, as we're learning that young men are skewing conservative, probably feel the same. Not one of these young guys wants to go and die so that some creepo pedo can dance nude wearing a Bugs Bunny mask hopping down the street. I saw this really sad video. It's like super old man. I think he was like a World War II vet crying, saying, I can't believe this is what we fought for. If only we'd known. Well, it's not what you fought for, good sir. But you and those around you did not stand up for your nation at home. And I know a lot of people are going to be mad that, no, listen, it was what I'm saying. Too many people came back, too many people grew up, and they just said, I don't care. Leave me alone. They don't pay attention to the news, they don't pay attention to politics, and they let things get out of control. Now, there are a lot of good men, and I think most of the veterans who fought in these wars were the ones fighting at home. I'm just saying, this nation, too many people absolve themselves of their responsibilities to it. And that's an argument they're making in military.com about the draft, that if you were drafted, you'd certainly have some responsibility to this country and it would force civic engagement. The problem is too much of this country is this. This is what you get. Joe Biden called it the ready reserves. We are getting closer to the draft. Critics have accused Joe Biden of wanting World War III after the commander-in-chief issued an executive order authorizing the deployment of U.S. reservists to Europe. It's not just U.S. reservists. It's ready reserves. He's calling people back to active duty. That's more than just saying we need a little bit more. This is the select reserve forces. Biden issued the executive order Select reserve forces in an effort to augment Operation Atlantic Resolve, which began in 2014 in response to Russian actions in Ukraine. Here we go. U.S. troops will not be deployed to Ukraine if there are no U.S. forces fighting in Ukraine. Yes, but they are being sent to Europe. Here's the history of conscription. I find it very interesting. In World War I, they needed about 1 million people. They were only able to muster up 73,000. Okay. What do you think happens if Russia expands this war? There was an attack, which I think it was a missile strike. I'm not sure. A Russian attack took place 600 feet from the border with Romania. Romania is a NATO country. Article 5 triggered if that crosses the line. And then what? Now, Joe Biden goes on TV and says the U.S. must take action to prevent Russia as Vladimir Putin's war extends into NATO territory. What if Russia doesn't back down? Will this be a quagmire that goes on for decades, perhaps? What if Russia pushes back with more force? What if the U.S. realizes we're not winning in Ukraine? False flag attack? Accusing Moscow of attacking U.S. targets? Who knows? The Gulf of Tonkin was one. Russian lawmakers extend age limit for compulsory military draft. And this is where we may end up, my friends. This is where we may end up. Russia is saying raising the draft from 27 to 30. Right now in the U.S., it's typically if you're like 18 to 20 something. And if you're in your late 30s, you're probably fine. But that won't matter if this goes World War III at all. Doesn't matter how old you are. You could be 55 and they're going to say, can you lift a box? Then you're going to war. Not literally the front line of combat. That'll always be the young men. But they're going to find something for you to do. I wonder where we go from here. I'm hoping that everything calms down, but the only path is escalation. There's no exit. There is nothing that we see when it comes to Ukraine that suggests this will go the other direction. Everything suggests escalation. If I were to have told you 2 years ago that let's say 3 years ago, the conflict in Ukraine's Donbass would eventually result with military strikes in Moscow in civilian areas, people would be like, what's the Donbass? Yes. Now we're at the point where Russia and civilian areas are being targeted. They're saying they're military targets in civilian areas. So we'll see. I can only tell you, my friends, the important news that you should be warned about. Indy 100 reports man abducted by aliens 50 years ago said he was warned of World War III and COVID. Well, that proves it. No, I'm just kidding. I thought this article was funny. I'm not going to read it. Military draft, ladies and gentlemen. They're starting to increase the calls for it because they have to. They're not going to back down. If China attacks Taiwan and we're pressed on two fronts, the all-volunteer force ain't going to cut it. But how many people in this country are going to die for a man in a Bugs Bunny mask in the nude flopping his genitals in public? Sorry, I don't think so. I think the U.S. is in trouble because the Democrats have supported this crackpot psychotic stuff. And you know what? It's probably China that's been pushing it. You look at TikTok. We played this video on Timcast IRL of some dude on TikTok Live screaming and trying to stack hardware nuts. And he's just like an insane person. You look at Dylan Mulvaney. This psychotic cultural breakdown has ripped apart the fabric of this country. And the U.S. government let it happen. And the intelligence agencies let it happen. So good luck maintaining your war. I can only assume that either these people are completely incompetent and psychotic in the intelligence agencies, or they really want the U.S. to fall. And that's been the plan the whole time. I suppose we'll see. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.